Hi there. Welcome to the second and final lecture on chapter 10, human sexuality. Your chapter here is going to start with brains. And I mean, who's out there having sex with people's brains? Nobody. I mean, almost nobody. I hope, literally nobody. Who cares? Whatever. So like look at the brain regions and that one little spot next to the hypothalamus down there. That's the one spot where there's a tiny bit of difference between women and men and gay men. The most interesting thing here when you look at that anatomy is that male human sexuality is linked to aggression or violence. So we look at pan-troglodytes and pan-paniscus, pan-troglodytes, chimpanzee basic, pan-paniscus, bonobo chimpanzees, and bonobos seem to have gotten across a river at low water at some point thousands of years ago. And they've been geographically separated from pan-troglodytes, classic. They can't interbreed because they can't cross the river, right? They have the right number of chromosomes. If you got them together in a place, they make babies. They can't make babies. They're a separate species because of geographic limitation. Now, when they crossed that river, it seems like a few closely related chimpanzees crossed the river. And when you bottleneck, it seems to have happened with humans maybe a million years ago. When you bottleneck a population, you make them all genetically related. The closer the genetic relations, the better we treat each other. And pan-troglodytes are these kinship bonds that led later to pseudo-kinship bonds, where they don't like to be aggressive to each other. They solve their problems with sex instead of with violence. All right, so we have these two kinds of chimpanzee. Pan-troglodytes are actually really aggressive. They will do genocide. They will batter females, sexual aggression. And like an argument we have, an anthropological argument we have anyway, is humans, are they a tournament species or a pair bonding species, right? So gorillas, total tournament species. One male gorilla dominates this group of female gorillas and takes on all challengers. He's the biggest and the strongest and the fittest. And younger gorillas keep trying to take over his harem. They can defeat him. They can get the harem and have access to the receptive females. And chimpanzees are like a step down from there. The more you study them, the more cooperative actually they are, and the less that they're, the males are always battling for social standing, and in the end it doesn't matter that much because they're sneaking off in the woods and bribery with food and all kinds of stuff. So they're kind of down from there. But are humans, are they more like pan-troglodytes or pan-paniscus? It's a pernicious question. And anatomically, neuroanatomically, it seems like we're closer actually to troglodytes, to regular old chimpanzees. So battering, female chimpanzees, when they give birth to babies, they totally dominate the babies, male or female. They're really quite aggressive towards them as they're growing up, and they can easily subdue them with physical force when they need to or want to. And males will keep testing them. And there'll come a day when the male is bigger than the female, and then he physically dominates his mother and every female. And the point of this seems to be chimpanzee sexual activity takes like 30 seconds to a minute, maybe, which is plenty of time to be interrupted. If you're not the highest status chimpanzee, or even if you are, sometimes the other chimpanzees will see what's happening and come and disrupt the activity. So If you only have a few seconds to get the job done, you need the female not to resist. So there's this link, this neurological link, where um, the limbic system is really involved in human sexuality and really involved in fear and aggression, right? The amygdala, excuse me. So this really, and in our behavior, like how many domestic violence cases happen every day around the world, and how many cultural mores, keep women covered up. How entrenched is domestic violence in some cultures around the world? I mean, largely including this one. So male aggression is kind of part and parcel of human sexuality. We're not chimpanzees at all. We're not pan-troglodytes, we're not pan-peniscus. We do seem to be like, we have inherited some of the sexual behaviors of each. All right, that's all anthropology. It's really just preface. Forget about it. So Kinsey, 40s and 50s, pre-war to post-war America. So Kinsey's working as a counselor, and couples are bringing him their problems, which often include their sexual problems. The more that he hears about the sexual problems of people in relationship, the more he compares that to what we think we know about sexuality in the 30s, late 30s or early 40s, and the two just don't match up. So at this time, we're referring to masturbation as self-abuse. It's sinful, and God doesn't want any semen wasted and all that stuff. And sex out of marriage, and miscegenation laws. Black and white people can't have sex, almost all through the South. And really very prurient interest in sexuality. Look up like Kellogg's cornflakes. There's a bizarre story there relating to trying to reduce the sexual urges of inmates in psychiatric institutions. So Kinsey is looking at all this stuff, and it doesn't make any sense given the complaints that people have and the problems people have in counseling. So the actual behavior seems much more variable than what we're told by church and by educators who aren't allowed to talk about it, and by Kellogg and so forth. So Kinsey just is going to ask a bunch of people. His method is really a survey method. So we talked about surveys, didn't we, in the How to Science section. Do you remember the weakness of surveys? The main weakness is people are lying liars who lie, right? It's not always even me you're lying to. Sometimes you're lying to yourself. And he's like making eye contact with people, right? It's not mailing out surveys, at least not in the beginning. He's going to people's houses and sitting down with them over coffee and asking questions like, do you masturbate? Well, how often do you masturbate? Did you have sex before you were married? And he's asking women these questions with their husband on the couch next to them, What kind of answers are you going to get to these questions? He's getting people to demonstrate, to masturbate in front of him. And so what kind of information are you going to get making eye contact with people and asking them questions about stuff that in the 30s was a stoning offense, Even so, the information he got from his surveys totally blew the lid off what we understood about human sexuality during the time period. The prurient interests just sort of glossed over everything. We're living in a fantasy bubble. Think of TV at the time. Think of like Leave It to Beaver, and any any movie or TV show in black and white, men and women were sleeping in separate beds, right? Well, how did little Beaver Cleaver get born if mommy and daddy don't share a bed? How did that happen? Men sleep in the same bed, right? Read Moby Dick. It was just normal. So you have Abbott and Costello and the Three Stooges and so forth, all sharing beds. Men and women never share beds on television. That's just, the censors would go crazy. Not allowed to even suggest that people. Toilets, not allowed. Leave It to Beaver was the first show ever to show a toilet on screen. And the books that came out of these studies were largely banned. So we're, just in the last 30 years or so, we're rediscovering, getting our hands on rediscovering, making it available. Is it called Human Sexual Behavior in the Male and Human Sexual Behavior in the Female? 2 books, 40s and 50s. Mm-hmm. Masters and Johnson a little later. By the late 50s, they're publishing. And they're more interested in observation. They're not going out and asking people questions so much. So they pioneered the use of the fishbowl, which is a bed in a room with glass walls and one-way glass. So all the scientists stand around outside, video cameras and clipboards, observing. And then you get volunteers to come into the room, and you get women to masturbate on the bed, and you get couples to have sex and all that, and just observe, because that had never been done before. And then later, even going to the point of having people masturbate while in an fMRI machine, which you have to keep your head perfectly still. It's clamped, and like if you can be in that room with people watching and listening from another room and become aroused and see that through to completion, God bless you. I find people who can and find out what's happening in people's brains while other things are happening in their bodies. But all this really allows them to come up with this theory to describe what they call the sexual response cycle, which is 4 stages: arousal, plateau, orgasm, resolution. Arousal is just when the body is going from its normal everyday state of affairs to becoming sexually receptive. So blood flow to the genitalia, erections, all of the erectile tissue, men and women covered in erectile tissue, lubrication, all that kind of stuff, the breathing and the cardiac and the tension, the dopamine hits. Plateau, people are engaged in the sexual activity. It feels good, it's ongoing, nothing's imminent, right? So you go arousal, plateau, and then orgasm, a little spike there. Everyone knows what orgasm is. As an aside, what's female orgasm for? Probably a spandrel. If we talked about this, spandrels are the things that just aren't really related to evolution that much. It's stuff that doesn't really confer an advantage, but also doesn't confer a disadvantage. And so it just hangs out in the population, like beards. Why have facial hair? Why have hair just here? Nipples on men. Men don't need nipples, but women need nipples. And the sort of workarounds and weird biological process it would take to produce men without nipples and women with nipples is just complicated. There's no reason for it, and so nothing in the environment selects for it, and so men have nipples. It's a spandrel. Orgasm, probably the same. Men need orgasms because that's how bodily fluids mix together. Right? That's how sperm gets egg. Women don't need orgasms for procreation. There's all kinds of theories, like maybe it dips the cervix in the puddle, and you can film that happening, but it doesn't matter. Maybe it's reinforcing. Women who have more orgasms have more sex. Also, just doesn't seem to matter, and so on. The thing is that you can find out how many orgasms women have, how orgasmic they are, in fact, and count how many children they have. There's no correlation. So orgasms no function really at all in reproduction. Spandrel, and that's not an argument against women having orgasms. I'm saying enjoy your spandrels, have a good time. Resolution, or the refractory period. So this is when the act is complete, and we just start going back to our normal everyday settings, like the pre-arousal setting. And for men in particular, this generally produces a refractory period. And this is the period when no amount of stimulation can produce another erection or another orgasm. And that can vary from a few minutes to a few hours to even a day. Women are much more likely to be multi-orgasmic. That is, the orgasm doesn't lead to resolution and there is no refractory period. Orgasm often leads to the desire for ongoing activity rather than resolution. Resolution. If you like your Evo Psych, absolutely take it with salt. Same, right? But if you like these kinds of discussion, why would it be that men get really sleepy after an orgasm? It might be so that the women can crawl away. Increasing testosterone, maybe it increases aggression. And once you've done the mating, maybe it's a good idea not to be in the vicinity of the man anymore. So that's an Evo argument. Do you want to spend a bunch of time? That's basically it. That's the whole chapter, okay? You have the NOVA module to get through. I lectured that before. But read the NOVA module, take the test. But that's it, we're done. Do you love all this stuff? In particular, do you love the anthropology part? Do you want to get into it? If so, Robert Sapolsky is, I was telling you about him in the last lecture. He's a guy, he's a psychologist and an anthropologist. He likes to study things. He has this interesting format. A thing is happening. You make an observation about a person. Can we explain it at the millisecond level? Right? What was going on a millisecond before the behavior? What was going on a second before, an hour before, a day before, 10 years before, a million years before, like that. And he takes on human sexuality in his lecture series. It's really good. The last one crosses over a little bit into human aggression, which is appropriate because human sexuality crosses over into human aggression. So this is like 3 solid hours of lecture on the topic. It's great. I can't recommend it enough. Okay. So let's talk disorders. This is, it's just for fun, really. Turn off if you want. Hang around if you're interested. So disorders of arousal, including erectile dysfunction. ED is very popular today. We sort of expect men to continue to be sexual beings until they die, you know? That might be somewhat unrealistic. Erectile dysfunction is often related to declining testosterone. So women expect hormone fluctuations over a 30-day period as long as they're fertile, and then a decline after the fertile period. Men can expect a peak in testosterone at like 18 or 20 or something, and then a slow gradual decline until 40 or 50, then a steeper decline in testosterone levels. And that can just reduce aggression and reduce sexual feelings and impulses, okay? But it could also be a problem of cardiac function. So what I'm saying is please see a real doctor. If that's happening, you're trying, it's not working, you want it to work, please see an actual real doctor. Because there could be more going on than seems to be going on. Don't just like order Cialis online or something. You could have a dicky ticker, bad heart. So check into that. And ladies, if there's a man in your life going through that, real doctors, please save a life. If you want to, you could also let it run its course. Lack of interest, male and female, lack of interest often has to do with relationship issues. We've been together a long time, we don't like each other that much. Maybe our bodies have changed, we've gotten lumpy and hairy in all the wrong places, and our breath smells. Personal hygiene isn't kept up, we fight all the time. Why would we be interested? So working on arousal is often working on the relationship. And it's just normal for sexual encounters to decline over time. By the time you've been married 20 years, if you're having sex 6 times a year, that might even be a little ambitious, you know? Yeah, expectations. You're seeing people on TV and movies and stuff, in novels, if you still read those, they're having sex all the time. And that just isn't normal. When you're young and hormones are really high and everyone looks great naked, I mean, these days we have better stuff to do. And there's also a correlation between IQ and sexual activity, but it's inverse. That is, the higher someone's IQ, the less they have sex. They have as much access to sex as anybody else. It's not that nerds are unattractive. It's that higher IQ people have other ways to establish and maintain relationships and other things to do that are satisfying. Okay? All right. Disorders of orgasm. That is, everything seems to be functioning, but you can't get from plateau to orgasm. For men, age is often a factor. Not just declining testosterone here, but declining penile sensitivity. Entropy is everywhere, okay? Premature ejaculation is a young man's problem typically, and the inability to complete the act ultimately is an old man's problem generally. And there's also the factor of porn and creep. That is, we have access to certain kinds of stimulation. That stimulation is cheap and easy. Actually, being in a room with another person is quite difficult. Getting to the room, overcoming inhibitions in the room. People don't look that good in person. The stuff you observe in film, people don't really want to do that with you. It's degrading. So you can reach a point where, you know, a lot of sexual activity is conditioned, and you're conditioned to become aroused and the whole thing with this kind of set of stimuli. But instead, in person, you're getting this completely different set of stimuli. And so people who watch too much pornography can get to the point where they can't really engage in the act unless that stimulus is present. For women, disorders of orgasm are most commonly about education. There's the line in Harry Potter, Dolores Umbridge, it's one of the later movies, she's taking over Defense Against the Dark Arts, and she says, your education in the dark arts has been remarkably uneven, right? And that's us with our sex ed. Our sex ed is not remarkably uneven, it's wildly uneven, you know? Depending which county you grew up in or which state in the United States. You might have gotten just sort of prurient abstinence only education. Sex is bad, don't do it. And if you absolutely must do it, close your eyes and think of England. Get married first and all that stuff. So we have a video. People, professional sexual psychologists have a video. It's called Our Bodies, Ourselves. Who just give you the tape and send you home, and you go watch the tape and learn about your body. Women don't know anything about their bodies. Often that's the cause of the problem. And then So sex education for men is often really helpful if the partner knows what to do or even knows that they should be doing something, to make the act more mutual. That often cures the problem. If it doesn't, then the problem might be medical, and it might even be causing pain. So there are problems of pain during sex. And again, education on lubricant go a long way here. All right. We often don't need a lot of complicated psychoanalytic talking about your mother. Just some water-based lubricant, oil-based if we're not using condoms, because oil will degrade the latex, cause it to break. But education, sex ed, lubricant, 9 times out of 10, problem solved. 1 time out of 10, we need medical intervention. You can't talk someone out of experiencing pain when they're having sex. Really important to make the difference between what's biological and what's psychological, because you can end up gaslighting. All right, the part everybody loves, paraphilias. A paraphilia is when sexual arousal requires something that's not typically sexual. Okay, so some kind of object or class of objects like latex or body parts that generally aren't considered sexual, non-genital body parts. Like, go and Google, type in the name of any actress, and the autocomplete will have one of the options will be feet. Amanda Seyfried, feet, like that. I don't get it. I don't condone it. I don't condemn it, but I don't get it. Feet are gross. Behavioral stuff. So fetishes are about objects. You need an object or a non-sexual body part. Behavioral paraphilias, it does what it says on the tin. So like voyeurism or peeping, not exactly the same thing. Peeping is unsophisticated. You're just in dark alleys at night, peeking in people's windows, hoping to get a glimpse. And then, but voyeurism is the more evolved. It's gone all the way to you must be looking at a non-consensual other to get that arousal. What's the problem? The non-consensual part of the equation. What's the problem with peeping? Well, no one's given you permission to peep on them. And if they did, it isn't any fun. If you haven't set it up ahead of time with a consenting adult, you might be looking at a non-consenting non-adult, right? And now you're in a whole different class. You're in the class of pedophiles. Flashing, just like exposing yourself to strangers. Again, that can sometimes by accident or on purpose involve children, whole different class of behavior. And then kind of the boutique end of that is exhibitionism, where even couples will engage in activity and other people will watch, and that is what makes it fun. The flashing, it has to be non-consensual to be any fun. The exhibitionism, performing for other people can be fun when they want to see a performance. Apparently, I haven't, that's what they tell me. Telephone scatologia, this is an old one. This is like calling people up on the phone, and then back when phones were like this instead of like this, you call people up on the phone and you just breathe heavily and then talk dirty to them, and they don't like it. What's the equivalent of that in the modern world? Now that phones look like this and have cameras, what's the equivalent? That's right, dick pics. Non-consensually sending photographs of your genitalia to other people. It doesn't roll off the tongue like telephone scatologia. So that's a thing. What's the problem? It's non-consensual. Frotteurism, rubbing up against people in public places. Apparently the subway trains in New York are full of peakerism, penetrating another person's body with a sharp object, not their genitalia, like stabbing people and getting off That's the peakerist way. Okay, so those are some of the behavioral paraphilias. Not trying to skirt the issue of pedophilia because I don't want to talk about it. Grosses me out, man. So S&M, and I really want to be careful here to separate BDSM as kind of a social movement where people get together and it's fun, from sadism, masochism, sadomasochism as a disorder. All right. I'm really asking that you keep your peanut butter out of my chocolate, and I'll keep my chocolate out of your peanut butter. We're talking about two whole separate classes of things, and it's that problem of us sharing words in common. So sadism is when you get sexual pleasure from causing pain to a non-consenting other. And in BDSM play, there's a consenting other, and they're role playing that for you. And the community has done a ton of stuff to advance consent and get it public and get us talking about it. Okay, cool. The sexual sadist, however, non-consenting. And the masochist, the person who derives pleasure from being hurt in a community with safety stuff and everyone is into it. Okay, we're not talking about in a community. We're talking about people who are engaging in these behaviors, and they're finding sadists to hang out with and abusers. And it's not as part of a structured play. It's a relational style where people are actually really getting badly hurt. Okay, not the community, the psychiatric disorder. What makes it a disorder? What makes it just not two or more people having fun together in a consensual manner? We've already established the government and the psychiatric community and the psychological community just don't have the right or the standing to regulate adult consenting activity. What makes it a disorder where someone like me would need to step in? I know why this is here. I think this goes up a little higher. Let's drag this up. People with one paraphilia usually have more than one, especially behavioral. So if you see someone peeping, it's likely they also have a fetish, and it's likely they also do some flashing, and it's likely they've sent some photographs where they shouldn't, that kind of thing. Okay, so back to this. What makes a thing a disorder? This line really. Like every diagnosis in the DSM, it's going to be accompanied by this statement, right? It must cause clinically significant distress or impairment. That impairment is in one of three categories: vocational, educational, or social relational. So if you're really into blow to pop, that's the people who like circus balloons, and you can definitely don't go on Google and type it in, okay? But you can find videos of like attractive young women, which is really irrelevant because the people into this don't care who's blowing up the balloon. They have giant circus balloons and they spend a lot of time stretching them out and getting them ready. And then they inflate them slowly and with great pomp and circumstance. The balloon gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's a circus balloon. It's not like a regular party balloon. Bigger and bigger until eventually it can't take any more air. The anticipation is building and building, and then finally the balloon pops, and so there's a person watching the video. Okay. All right. Objectively, that seems weird, but what if you're into it and you find someone who's into blowing up the balloon? Where's the distress or the impairment? You're not bothering anybody, right? It's not like you're doing it on the public street, and even if you were, no one would know. Who cares? I do not. I'm out. What's the issue? The issue is when you can only get involved that way. And you're trying to have a relationship, a heteronormative relationship with a heteronormative person, and they're unsupportive of this activity. They think it's weird, it grosses them out. The thing is just deviant, and you can't find anybody to make friends with who shares that deviance. That's a problem. It might be causing subjective distress to the individual because they feel like a freak or a loser. They feel ashamed. It might be causing impairment because they're unable to engage in relationship. They have this thing, their partner wants vanilla, they want rocky road, they can't get together. Okay. The other half of this equation, though, is going to be deviance. For the standard run-of-the-mill disorders, the person themselves has to be distressed, all right, or impaired, right, disabled. These disorders, the paraphilias in particular, the non-consensuality of it, that's the problem. We're looking at abnormality as deviance here, right? And if you're like photographing your body parts and sending them to people and nobody wants to see that, you're gonna get in trouble, you can get in legal trouble, you're harming other people. And as various historical figures in America have said, since at least the early 1800s, your right to swing your fists ends where my nose begins. Now you're violating the rights of other people. And the behavioral paraphilias, generally non-consent is in there, right? The sadist wants someone really to suffer, not to act out suffering while secretly enjoying the role. The peeper and the voyeur want to look at people who don't know they're being looked at. They like it candid, and they like the power that goes with getting the view. The flasher wants to surprise people. The exhibitionist might be in a different class. The scatologist, it's not like people having a long distance relationship who get on the Zoom. Bear in mind that Zoom's terms of service explicitly forbid you using the platform for that. People totally are using Zoom for that. Froterism, the rubbing up against people who don't know that you're getting off doing it, and so on, right? And stabbing people, obviously, right? Obviously. This is the deviance that goes in here in the abnormality. It's really the last part of the DSM where deviance is really a factor. You've stepped outside the bounds, you've colored outside the lines, and it's sick. All right, so that is human sexuality. Man, if you have like 4 or 5 hours, Robert Sapolsky is amazing. I can't recommend his video series enough on YouTube. And it's official, it's from Harvard, so it's regular. So that's it. Have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next chapter.